Thank you for joining us this morning. Our press conference will begin shortly. If you are having any technical problems, please visit Zoom support at support.zoom.us. Then type "Join a Meeting" into the search bar. You may also reach out to the Texas Section office at office@texasce, as in civil engineer.org. Again, office@texasce, as in civil engineer.org, and we will be happy to assist you. All participants will be muted for the duration of today's webinar. If you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box in your control panel. All questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. Again, thank you for joining us today, and our press conference will begin shortly.
Good morning and welcome to the Texas section of the American Society of Civil Engineers press conference to release the 2021 Infrastructure Report Card Brief. My name is Griselda Gonzalez and I serve as the ASCE Texas Section Vice President for Professional Affairs. As such, it is my honor to oversee the Infrastructure Report Card Committee and moderate today's press conference. I'm thrilled to see members of the news media, as well as ASCE members joining us today. Thank you for tuning in to learn about our state's infrastructure condition. We are pleased to share a summary of our findings today, including the grades, and we will release our full report later this month. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from ASCE Vice President and Texas A&M University Distinguished Professor, Dr. John Louis Brio, ASCE Texas Section President Sean Merrill, and Infrastructure Report Card Committee Chair Dr. Mark Boyd. We will take questions from the news media after we hear from today's guest speakers. We anticipate allowing about 15 minutes for questions and answers. You are welcome to type questions into the chat box, and please be sure to indicate your full name and associated news outlet. Please note this conference is being recorded. It will be shared with all ASCE members in Texas and also be available to the public. Now, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce the President of the American Society of Civil Engineers, Dr. John Louis Brio. Dr. Brio is a distinguished professor and the Spencer J. Buchanan Chair in the Zachary Department of Civil Engineering at Texas A&M University. He is a distinguished member of the American Society of Civil Engineers and a licensed professional engineer. His expertise is in foundation engineering and more generally, geotechnical engineering. He served as president of the Association of Geotechnical Engineering Professors and as president of the Geo Institute of the American Society of Civil Engineers. We are honored to have a Texan leading our global society. Thank you, Dr. Brio.
Thank you, Griselda. Good morning, and thank you to the Texas Section and Infrastructure Report Card Committee for the invitation to speak at today's press conference. I appreciate each one of you for your tireless efforts to put this report card together. You're truly leaders in your community, stepping up to the plate to provide a comprehensive and balanced assessment of your state's infrastructure system. These report cards at the state and the national level further the reputation of the American Society of Civil Engineers as the preeminent voice on infrastructure. Importantly, the recommendations included in this report cards get results. We saw this in 2020 when the Texas report cards recommendation on flood mitigation were adopted and funded after policymakers went looking for answers in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. This is an exciting time for those of us in the infrastructure space. President Biden indicated the aims to spend $2 trillion on infrastructure, including $50 billion on roads and bridges in just his first year. The president's plan also is expected to focus on green infrastructure, water systems, the electric grid, and broadband, all investments that would be made to withstand the impact of climate change and improve public health. The President's desire to see results on infrastructure provides a real opportunity in 2021 to make significant progress toward rehabilitating and modernizing our nation's built systems. As Congress works with the administration to develop a comprehensive infrastructure package, ASCE is at the negotiation table. Specifically, we have asked Congress to consider certain key priorities for any investments made to jumpstart the economy in the wake of the pandemic. These include ensuring that any infrastructure legislation helps the nation prepare for a sustainable and resilient future, prioritizing asset management and operation and maintenance needs, and restoring a strong federal partner in infrastructure investment. I look forward to hearing the findings from this new Texas Infrastructure Report Card. As a Texas resident myself, I also look forward to using this report card as an education tool in the coming months and years as we work to improve our communities here in the Lone Star State and guide policymakers towards smart policy. We have much to be proud of, from our iconic highways to our innovative water conservation strategies. And this report card will highlight those achievements and those responsible, while also recognizing areas where we need to improve. Let's hear now from Texas Section President Sean Merrill about all the important work being done in Texas before we jump to the grades.
Dr. Brill, thank you for your comments and for joining us today. We appreciate your time and your leadership. Now, before we release the grades, I invite ASCE Texas Section President Sean Merrill to provide an overview of the Texas Section and its activities. Mr. Merrill is an associate and senior traffic engineer with BGE Inc. He leads the traffic group for 3 North Texas offices. In addition, he serves as ASCE Texas Section President and ASCE Region 6 Governor, and is a past president of the ASCE Dallas branch. Outside of ASCE, Sean serves as the chair for both the City of Frisco's Parks and Recreation Board and the Collin County Planning Board. Sean.
Dr. Brill, thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Good morning. Today, ASCE Texas Section is pleased to present the results of the 2021 Texas Infrastructure Report Card, a monumental effort that spanned over 2 Texas Section presidential terms and a record 55-member committee. I appreciate the time contributed by past President Susan Roth, all committee members and section staff, as well as the stakeholder review effort provided by key government agencies. ASCE Texas Section represents more than 10,000 civil engineers statewide. In addition to the Texas Infrastructure Report Card, our members routinely support the year-round technical work of state agencies and policymakers. We hold the Texas Legislative Drive-In each legislative session, provide stakeholder comments and review of technical documents to agencies such as the General Land Office and the Texas Water Development Board, and our Government Affairs Committee reviews draft legislation and advises on infrastructure policy. The reason we conduct this work, as Dr. Brill mentioned, is that we, civil engineers, have an obligation to educate the public policymakers about the condition of our state's infrastructure and how to best make improvements. Infrastructure is a critical issue impacting the economy, our society and security, and the sustainable future of our great state. Although the 2021 Texas Infrastructure Report Card is an important advocacy tool, it is not intended to be a commentary on, nor an evaluation of, the performance of any government department, agency, or individuals of these groups. We commend these government agencies for their hard work and dedication to serving the citizens of Texas. It is through the hard work of this report card committee and the agencies that oversee the respective infrastructure categories that the citizens of Texas and legislators may understand the state of our infrastructure. Texas is the largest continental state, the second most populous state, and an economic powerhouse for the United States, leading the way in wind power energy production. Our state is home to some of the largest infrastructure systems in the nation, but our nearly 29 million person population is rapidly growing and requires an increasing need for infrastructure improvement. Now is the time to expand and not cut spending on infrastructure to continue the state's economic prosperity, increase public safety, improve environmental stewardship, and build resilience. Now is the time to secure funding through a variety of methods, including fixing the Federal Highway Trust Fund. Motor fuel taxes haven't been raised in decades and are not indexed to keep pace with inflation. What's more, Texas is a donor state to the Federal Highway Trust Fund. Diminishing fundings leaves us with less capital to support our growing population. Infrastructure has a significant impact on our daily lives. Too often, we take it for granted and simply expect it to work. Today, ASCE Texas Section is proud to provide a snapshot of our state's infrastructure condition, along with recommendations for a resilient future. So let's hear more about the grades and the solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Merrill. We appreciate your time today and your leadership. Without further ado, I'm happy to introduce ASCE Texas Section Infrastructure Report Card Committee Chair, Dr. Mark Boyd, to unveil the 2021 grades and to share our recommendations for a growing Texas. Dr. Boyd is a principal engineer at LCA Environmental, Inc., and an adjunct assistant professor at Southern Methodist University. Dr. Boyd is a past president of the ASCE Dallas branch and brings over 30 years of experience in civil and environmental engineering to our team. As Infrastructure Report Card Committee Chair, he oversaw 11 subcommittees comprised of 55 members across the state, with decades of expertise. The committee was responsible for assessing all relevant data and references. They consulted with other technical and industry experts. They developed summaries and assigned grades based on the data collected. We are especially grateful for the time Dr. Boyd and his committee members have volunteered. Mark. You're muted, Mark. Sorry. It had to happen.
Yes, it did. I was patiently waiting. Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Gonzalez, Dr. Brio, and Mr. Merrill. Good morning to everyone. It's great to be here, and it's an honor to join you for today's report card rollout press conference. Look, back in 2014, while I was on an ASCE legislative fly-in, I really wish I would have challenged a young congressional staffer who didn't believe infrastructure investment resulted in a notable or provable return on investment. I guess he and his boss just didn't understand higher infrastructure investment modernizes critical systems and lowers long-term operations and maintenance expenses. Investing in infrastructure pays for itself several times over. According to the Business Roundtable, every additional dollar invested in infrastructure delivers a return of roughly $3.70 in additional economic growth over 20 years. Infrastructure is the backbone of a successful economy and will afford our communities a 21st century way of life. On the other hand, neglecting infrastructure will leave us mired in static 20th century status quo or worse. Fast forward to 2019, when given the opportunity to be the chair of this committee, I jumped at the chance. Look, like all civil engineers, I was eager to become part of the solution, to help develop information and craft recommendations that address our neglected infrastructure. We kicked this thing off in January 2020. No clue what we were facing. Through quarantine virtual meetings and attention to our regular jobs, this tremendous 55-member committee found a way to keep it all together, even with all that 2020 foisted upon us. This team took on the most ambitious Texas report card ever, covering an unprecedented 12 categories, up from 8 last time in 2017. The report card is the product of thousands of volunteer hours by the committee and other supporting leaders from Texas and global ASCE. I owe everyone a personal thank you for their fantastic work and dedication to the mission. It's been one of my greatest professional privileges to work with this group, a true high-performing team delivering a valuable service to the state of Texas with elevated hopes to inform sound and thoughtful infrastructure funding, planning, and development. Through it all, the committee and supporting cast pivoted and adapted, immersed in the times and events that affected everything and everyone. They demonstrated the flexibility of thought and action that we'd all like to expect from engineers, scientists, and government leaders. They showed no fear, producing their analysis even when facing obvious substantial uncertainty and challenges. They walked the walk. The 2021 Texas Report Card was created as a public service to citizens and policymakers to inform them of the infrastructure needs in this state. Civil engineers expressed their expertise within the familiar letter grade format to condense data into a brief analysis of Texas's infrastructure network. The 2021 report card also includes recommendations to improve our grades and to produce the quality of life every Texan deserves. The grades for Texas are a snapshot in time. While it was tempting to speculate about the possible future effect of the pandemic and other extraordinary factors unique to 2020, this committee did a great job filtering its report from speculative forward-looking statements and analysis. And now for the moment you've all been waiting for. Texas earned an overall GPA of C. Well, what this means is we're headed in the right direction from a C- back in 2017 report card, and still well above the 2017 national GPA of D+. By the way, the 2021 national report card rolls out on March 3rd. So we'll soon see how Texas compares to current national conditions. We found an improving trend in conservation, technology, planning, management, and overall increases in programs and availability of state funding and financing support. It's important to note that the Texas GPA improved even though some of the categories not included last time weighted the GPA downward with low individual grades. Although Texas infrastructure overall can be accurately described to be in fair to good condition, it is facing mounting needs for age and delayed maintenance. A number of infrastructure elements are performing adequately, but the majority lacked funding and faced daunting challenges to properly address accelerated deterioration. Texas finds itself poorly equipped to deal with environmental changes in the face of unprecedented growth. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Texas is growing by more than 1,000 persons per day. And as Texas civil engineers often quip, no one is unpacking water, sewer, or roadway systems from their luggage as they arrive here. The report card included 5 categories in good condition, that'd be the B range, 3 categories in adequate condition, that's in the C range, and 4 that are in poor condition and at risk in the D range. Those grades are aviation at a B-, bridges at a B-, dams earned a D+, drinking water earned a C-, energy scored a B+, that's our highest grade. Flood risk mitigation, that's what we called flood control last time, earned a C-. Levees scored a D. Public parks and recreation, a brand new category, never graded before, earned a C-. Highways and roads scored a D+. Solid waste scored a B. Transit scored a B-, and wastewater scored a D. So there's your report card. Now, energy infrastructure has received significant attention, with Texas as an emerging leader in renewable energy production, meeting demands as the population continues to grow. On the other hand, on the other extreme, our wastewater, dams, and levee networks need support as the Texas's growing population puts stress on these systems with inadequate future planning and funding on the table for now anyway. So unlike the state's drinking water infrastructure, Texas wastewater infrastructure is in steady decline. And with the funding shortfall of more than $200 million, Texas beaches and rivers are suffering as a result. The number of annual sanitary sewer outflows has more than doubled from 2,500 to 6,000 over the last 4 years. And Texas really needs to increase state and local funding by raising rates to reflect the true cost of service for the ever rising number of Texans. So, hindered by a lack of condition data and insufficient resources, dams and levees need oversight and investment to ensure protection of local communities. More than 1 million Texans and $127 billion worth of property are protected from inland storms and coastal hurricane floods by these systems. A state levee program is yet to be established, so a clear picture of the 567-mile levee system isn't available, and 75% are without screened risk classification. About 100 miles of levee systems are classified as high or very high risk. There were several notable successes in the report. The Lone Star State has done well to accommodate significant population growth through meaningful attention to transportation categories, with a B- grade for each of aviation, bridges, and transit categories. The lowest performer of the transportation categories, highways and roads, needs our attention. Texas's highway network is the nation's largest, with the fatality rate on Texas roadway above the national average, and Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston facing significantly more congestion than the national average. The average Texas auto commuter spends an additional 54 hours in traffic and squanders 21 gallons of fuel at a cost of $1,000 annually per commuter. Current funding levels and resources from the state's gas tax are inadequate to keep up with Texas's projected growth, leaving a $15 billion annual gap through 2040. Energy infrastructure received the highest grade of B+, with advancements in oil and gas and electricity infrastructure, maintaining the high bar established in the 2012 report card. Leading the U.S. in oil and gas energy production at more than a fifth of national produced energy, innovation has been key to Texas's dramatic growth of oil production from about 1 million barrels a day in 2011 to 5 million barrels a day in 2019. A noteworthy grade improvement, flood risk mitigation, received a C-, marking steady progress over 4 report card periods, driven by the progress of the state's flood mitigation infrastructure planning and financing. It's important to note flooding will always be a risk for parts of Texas. Roughly 1 in 10 Texans are at risk. And while eliminating flood risk from extreme storm events is impossible, as seen in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, we need to continue planning with resilience in mind. The estimated need for flood risk mitigation infrastructure exceeds $31.5 billion over the next decade. The Texas section of the American Society of Civil Engineers advises the following 7 actions. Lead with vision. Leaders from all levels, public and private, need to come together to ensure investments are spent wisely and mechanisms are in place for maintenance, rehabilitation, and inspections. Educate the public. Promote public education with all planned infrastructure projects. Prepare for the future. Leveraging material reuse, improved standards, and emerging technologies ensures infrastructure is resilient and sustainable. Maintain the balance. When considering a local land use planning, the function of existing and new infrastructure must preserve the balance between the built and natural environments by installing zoning and development reforms. Collect and utilize data. Infrastructure designs need to consider environmental and climate impacts and future population growth. Use of the latest data and scientific projections is crucial. Leverage asset management. Streamlined asset management across all infrastructure can be accomplished by communicating long-term needs incorporated to maintenance costs into the initial investment cost. Invest now to realize dividends later. Infrastructure investments should be increased, consistent with needs at all levels, or we jeopardize future growth while losing our status as an American and world economic powerhouse. Folks, it might surprise you to hear I was not born in the United States, and I did most of my growing up in the developing world. Despite what some of the lower grades suggest, there is a great deal of hope. I know what it's like to live in and around failing infrastructure. Trust me, we don't want to go there. The vast majority of Texans enjoy indoor plumbing, sewer lines in controlled systems, fishable and swimmable streams and lakes, an outstanding parks and recreation system, excellent paved roadways, and safe drinking water supply. Also, institutional open dumps are happily a thing of the past. Texas has a very strong energy infrastructure to modernize, push, and even help fund many other aspects of infrastructure growth and improvements. Not always common in developing regions of the world, we are blessed to have a talented, honest group of public servants at TxDOT, the TCEQ, the Texas Water Development Board, the Texas Railroad Commission, and other agencies all striving to make things better for everyone. As Texas Governor Abbott announced in his recent State of the State address, Texas now has the 9th largest economy in the world. That's if they placed us on the list with independent nations. Infrastructure systems for wastewater, levees, dams, and highways and roads must be lifted off D level to match our economic might. Just lifting those deficient categories off the floor and improving in other categories will make for a spectacular next report card to better reflect our tremendous economic resources. Texas civil engineers know that bold solutions with targeted infrastructure investment can make a huge difference in the quality of life for every Texan. With proper funding and planning, civil engineers are prepared to target bold, ambitious solutions toward the daunting problems reflected by some of the lower grades. Let's not let this extraordinary effort by this year's report card committee, by this year's report card team go to waste. During the present state legislative session and throughout the coming years, I challenge my Texas ASCE colleagues and anyone with any kind of influence to make infrastructure a part of regular conversations with legislators, regulators, business leaders, your colleagues, your friends, your family, and your neighbors. I hope this report card can be your guide to help you bring light to Texas's infrastructure critical needs. Look, let's all light this candle. Let's fund this thing and get to work. Thank you all for your time and attending today's press conference. Back to you, Mrs. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much for taking on such a task. We appreciate your time today and your leadership of the record-breaking 55-member Infrastructure Report Card Committee. Before we take questions from the news media, I'd like to share a quote from Texas Representative Dennis Paul, who was not able to be with us today. The ASCE Texas Infrastructure Report Card is a critical tool as we assess our needs and measure progress in actively building Texas into a better place to live, work, and raise a family. We must continue to work together with all levels of government, community leaders, industry partners, and universities, using this invaluable resource to help us be better informed about the issues facing Texas. Again, we appreciate Representative Dennis Paul for sharing his thoughts with us. As both a legislator and a licensed professional engineer, he gives his best regards as he was unable to join us today. Now, I bet there's some questions. Infrastructure Report Card Committee Chair, Dr. Mark Boyd, and several members of his committee are available today to answer questions. Joining us from the committee are Austin Miserly, Chair of the Highways and Roads Subcommittee, Curtis Beidel, Chair of the Levees Subcommittee and a member of the Dams Subcommittee, Mark Boyd, who you heard from, the committee chair, Max Wallach, co-chair of the Drinking Water and Wastewater Subcommittee, Melvin Spinks, co-chair of the Flood Risk Mitigation Subcommittee, and my good friend Patricia Freire, chair of the Parks and Recreation Subcommittee. Please note that we will prioritize questions from the news media, so please be sure to indicate your full name and associated news outlet. If we are unable to answer your questions today, please be sure to reach out to our media contacts, Jenny Peters and Kevin Longley. Their contact information will be provided at the end of today's press conference. And I'm looking to see if there are any questions now in our chat box.
I see a couple
Currently-
popping up in the Q&A box. There's two.
Okay. We'll just pause for a moment as they come in.
Griselda, I see them in the Q&A box.
You do.
I can help
Oh,
read them.
maybe I'm not, okay, give me a moment. Okay. There we go. Okay, we have a question. How do infrastructure challenges associated with highways and roads impact truck movement through Texas, which is a major freight hub? And I'm going to hand that question over to two folks. I'm going to go ahead and offer it to Austin and to Mark. So
Yes.
Austin, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Griselda. I'm pulling up the question to make sure that I answer it 100% correctly. The infrastructure challenges on roads and highways definitely impact the truck movement through Texas. We see some of the stuff that Mark touched on a little bit about the additional time it takes to travel at different hours. So when you run into traffic or maintenance issues as well on those businesses that run those freight hubs. So it can come from a few different angles. And the better those grades are and the better our highways and roads are in condition allows to better perform not only for just the regular person, but as well as businesses and freight companies as well.
Thank you.
Austin, the other part of the question was what improvements need to be made to highways and roads to better accommodate freight?
Yes, so maintenance, just general maintenance of pavement conditions is a big one. If you're running over potholes potentially, or that damage your vehicles, that causes issues, widening and safety issues as well. So there's a few different improvements that can be made. And many of those are outlined in the report whenever we get the full report completed and out to the public.
Thank you, Austin. Another question. Can you expand a little on what you would like the state's elected leadership to do about the $15 billion gap in funding for highways and roads? The governor and legislature have rejected efforts to use private-public partnerships and tolling for road projects.
Yes, so there have been some discussions about P3s or public-private partnerships and managed toll lanes over the recent years with the Texas legislature. And there's never a one-size-fits-all for the state infrastructure, especially a state the size of Texas and has the resources and infrastructure resources that Texas needs to be successful. And that is one avenue. And there's a lot of studies, public and private studies from across the country that show where P3s work very successfully. And then there's cases that they haven't kind of been as successful. So I think that is one area that can be investigated and utilized in Texas. And I think that there are multiple cases that have shown the benefits of those. And I hope that the legislature continues to and look in those as well as educate the public and private agencies can educate the legislature on the benefits of those in the future.
Thank you, Austin. We have another question for Mark. With a grade of a C minus, it was mentioned that the grade is lifting with each assessment. The question is Texas moving in the right direction quick enough to mitigate even such events such as the mitigate events such as the Houston Tax Day flood and or Hurricane Harvey?
Well, the answer is I'm going to kick this over to Melvin here just with a quick intro. The grade for flood risk mitigation, which we did change the name from flood control, is improving because we feel like the state's better prepared. I'm going to since this question is really about flood risk, I'm going to let Melvin expand on that answer.
Yes, thank you, Mark. And, the question really is around, are we moving in the right direction to look at our investments in flood mitigation? And I believe the report card going from a grade of a D+ to a C- reflects really the new investments that the state is making in the funding through the Flood Infrastructure Fund, through the Texas Resiliency Fund. And yes, as a state as a whole, they're what we call getting in the business of flood risk management. A lot of the funding to flood control has been at the local levels through cities, communities, and counties. And we see the state stepping up through now their program, as I've mentioned, the Flood Infrastructure Fund, as well as the Coastal Texas Study. So we believe, yes, the state is moving in the right direction. Is it quick enough? Well, there's been a long-term need for investment in flood reduction. And so the past certainly needed a lot more attention. That's why we were in the D category for years, but we think it is going in the right direction.
Thank you, Melvin. We have another question. How has COVID been factored into infrastructure development in Texas over the past year? As well as how has the state, or I'm trying to understand this question, as well as the state might be able to move forward with its infrastructure needs. So Mark, so they're asking how has COVID been factored into our infrastructure?
That's a question we kind of expected someone to ask. The effect of the pandemic and the COVID impacts are we feel like they're probably transient, not a blip, but they're probably something that if we overthought what effect it would have on policymakers as far as infrastructure funding, as far as demands on things like airports and roads, that first of all, it would be nothing but guesswork because we don't have a crystal ball. So we have, as I mentioned, we have left out speculative analysis out of this report card because basically we don't have any information on it. We went with concrete information that was currently available to develop our analysis.
Thank you, Mark. Another question, I think this might be a two-parter as well for Mark and perhaps Max. Question from Bridget with the Austin American-Statesman. To what extent does the ASCE review include a review of the security features of these infrastructure systems? She had mentioned that she was thinking about the cybersecurity attack that she just saw last week at a water treatment plant in Oldsmar, Florida. Does our review of water and wastewater infrastructure in Texas touch on the cybersecurity of these systems? So in general, I think it's a cybersecurity question for our infrastructure systems. And
all right. It's all in the criteria provided by ASCE. Really, throughout that, one of the things includes security, and is reflected by low grades in water and wastewater, particularly. That is one of the things that's factored in. There is no information available about any plans specifically to upgrade systems, which is a concern.
I was on that subcommittee, and so I do recall that there was some discussion about it, and I think we did evaluate that we need to improve technology in these systems for those reasons because of cybersecurity attacks. So I was part of that group, as I mentioned. So it was considered and was part of the grading factor. Question from, I'm sorry if I do not pronounce your name correctly, Sanjita Menon with KUT News. The question is, what infrastructure issues are particularly striking in the Austin area? And particularly Austin. So I'm going to ask Austin, Ms. Early, if Austin and Mark, I don't know if you know, in reviewing the subcommittees, they want to highlight Austin issues that we mentioned in this report.
Yeah,
And,
there were.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Griselda. There were a few topics that were kind of brought up, the highways and roads. We discussed a little bit of the congestion in the larger cities, not just specifically Austin, but Houston and the Dallas metro area. But this is really a statewide report card. And so we took different information and we had available certain information from, say, Austin, as well as other areas throughout Texas. But it's really focusing specifically on the state and the state as a whole and all the infrastructure parts that go into that, not specifically one area versus the other, since it is the Texas report card. Anything you want to add, Mark?
No, I agree with that. We have some other questions, which is why I would like to get to them.
Hey, team.
Griselda?
Go ahead, Lindsay.
I just wanted to make one additional comment. In our transit section of the infrastructure report card for Texas, we did discuss recent legislation passed by Austin area folks to invest further in transit systems here in Austin. So that is one other highlight I wanted to mention. And as an Austinite myself, really important. Thank you.
And this would be a good time, Griselda. There seems to be some general questions about whether the report card provides solutions, and also some questions about whether there's localized problems in certain areas. The full report card itself does provide some detail on that, so we encourage you to review that. And as far as solutions, we have some broad solutions that are provided in terms of specific needs we've identified, but the detail of those solutions is going to be pending decisions by lawmakers.
Thank you, Mark. Next question is, can you provide any details on what parts of this state have the most need in terms of wastewater and levees, both of which received a D grade? Is it a localized problem? I guess, Curtis, I'm going to hand over the levee question to you.
Yes.
Yes, certainly, Griselda. And a lot of our levee systems are in the coastal areas, down by especially, Harris County and the Houston area. But the levee systems are really pretty spread out in a lot of our major metro areas as well in the state. So it's not a localized problem to the coast. It's all over our state that we have systems that need to be upgraded.
Thank you, Curtis. Max, would you happen to have an opportunity to offer some answer for the wastewater?
Yes, sure. Yeah, so for the wastewater, there's different parts of the state have different problems, and a lot of what we found is that these, the larger metropolitan areas have problems with, there have been a lot of consent decrees with combined sewer overflows. So that's more of a metropolitan issue, and then in some of the rural areas, there are issues with the types of septic systems that they're using. So there are different areas across the state that have different issues, and just depending on the locality, the issue is going to be different. But there are different issues across the state.
Thank you, Max. For Patricia, what was considered in the grading? State parks, city parks, Corps of Engineer parks?
So for the actual assessment, we strictly focused on the state level. I mean, as you guys know, Texas is a big state. So if we had gone ahead and included every city, local park, it would have been a very in-depth research project. So we primarily focused at the state level with including some national parks that are located here in Texas.
Thank you, Patricia. Next question is it possible to include academic scientists in the future? Mark, I'll let you handle some of this, but I would like to say, I know we had professors on our team reviewing this as well. I was a student of Dr. Wiseman, who was on our team. So Mark, I'll let you answer the rest of that.
Well, no, I was gonna, most notably, Dr. Jose Weissman. I myself am an academic on the faculty at Southern Methodist University. And as a researcher there years ago doing my doctorate, considerable amount of work in stormwater and pollution control. So we had academics represented, and they're more than welcome to be on the committee. There are others too that I don't mention. But certainly we had a very well-rounded group, not just of private consulting engineers, but also of nonprofits, government agencies. Some of them choose to remain anonymous, but major and small cities, public servants were on this committee. So we had a very well-rounded group.
Thank you, Mark. So we're going to go ahead and close our questions now. As we close our discussion today, I would like to thank our ASCE Government Affairs team, both at the national and local level, who are currently taking the message to our national and state leaders. Our national team is preparing for the legislative fly-in, and our local Texas team is preparing for the legislative drive-in. We are thankful for the support of these teams to educate our leaders and provide us training. We are truly the infrastructure advisors because we have an obligation above all else to protect and advance the health, safety, and welfare of the public through the practice of civil engineering. This is why we do what we do. Thank you again for joining us today to learn about our state's infrastructure condition. It was a pleasure to share a summary of our findings with you. Don't forget, we will release a full report later this month, and we're always happy to do follow-up questions and interviews. If we were unable to answer any of your questions today, please be sure to reach out to our media contacts, Jenny Peters and Kevin Longley. This concludes our press conference.
The meeting will now end.
Thank you.